Okay, we're going to get ready here in about 30 seconds. Good evening and welcome to April 15th Transportation Advisory Board meeting. This call to order. We do a roll call.
Chair Lehner.
Here.
Board Member Bennett.
Here.
Board Member Wicklund.
Here.
Vice Chair McKee Burrows. Here. Board Member McInerney.
O, which is Boulder, Louisville, Superior up to Netherland and Lyons, and a small piece of Longmont, including Phil's house. So I am his representative. Thanks for having us tonight. This is great. It's going to get the full report from our great staff. I was the chair last year. I'm very happy to have turned that over this year. And but we are very involved in some of the legislation that's going on. Tabor is our big issue right now. Well, we've got several big issues, but that one's coming up. We lose, RTD has a 1 cent sales tax. 6/10 of that is the original tax, the base tax. You can think of it as mostly the buses. And the other 4/10 is fast tracks, which does have some bus, but it's mostly the trains. And based on a ballot issue in 1999 that funded some additional development, there was a waiver of the Tabor cap and the Tabor rules. We got an exemption until we paid off the base bonds, which will happen in November. So we've looked at what our options are. It puts something around $600 or $630 million of RTD's money, about just over half subject to Tabor. And looking at what other counties in the area, Jefferson County and El Paso, that have not debruced or subject to Tabor, they're having to refund about 7 to 10% of their revenues per year, which means we would be at risk for about $40 to $60 million refunded every year. It's a big issue. It won't take long before it affects our ability before we have to start cutting service. We might get through. We've got pretty good, solid reserves, as Eric was saying. We've been, I think, managing our finances well, and our staff has done a great job of doing some refinancing. But we're looking at that. We're doing some polling. We have some early polls that other people have done that have looked pretty good. There was the Front Range Passenger Rail District asked a question on their poll about whether, without raising taxes, could RTD keep its money, and got a 60% support response. So we were pleased with that. There have been a couple of other recent polls that others have done asking, approval ratings. One of them in Denver was Denver City Council, Denver Mayor, the police department, I think school board, and only RTD and Denver Airport got what they called highly favorable ratings. So we're encouraged, but we have to keep moving, and I think by June the board will be making the decision on that, and you will be hearing more. Thank you.
With that, we'll turn it over to Natalie Hanlos from RTD's Planning Division.
Service Development.
She'll tell me.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. My name is Natalie Handlos. I'm the lead or senior service planner scheduler for what we call North Team within the RTD Service Development Division. I have several colleagues with me here tonight. We have Greg Fulkin, who's our Service Planner 1. We have Kelsey Ryan, who's our Service Planner 2. We have Ali, who is our Project Manager for 119. And we have Chris Quinn, who's also a Project Manager within the Planning Department. So I'll take it from here. Let's see. Make sure, is it working? Nope, there we go. That size. Okay. We're going to give you a quick update on local regional services, some of the special services, and a little bit update on long-range planning. That includes fixed routes, special services, future plant services that are mainly within the 119 BRT implementation. Update on the new fare structure, and then an update on the 119 BRT engineering implementation. All right, fixed route update. I'm going to hand it over to Greg. We're going to tag team it here.
Push the far right.
Oh, there we go. Thanks for having us. Here is our expected operating costs year over year from 22 to 23. Really wasn't a lot of changes between the 2 years. We have not been able to add service back like we'd like to. And that just gives you a baseline of what we have done the last couple of years. Next slide, please. Here is our average boarding weekdays by route, and this is off our fall run boards. And as you can see, we're using 2019 as a baseline. 2020, everything fell off with the pandemic, and we've slowly been coming back. It's still not where we would like it to be. It's still, and a lot of our adding services back is dependent on ridership. What's the ridership? What's driving it? Some routes have turned around a little better, but we're still far below pre-pandemic levels. Next slide. Here again, fall run boardings. This is for the regional routes. This would be the Bolt and the LD. And there again, you can see that we're starting to come back a little bit. We're still about 500 people a day lower than we were in 2019. This is the local boardings for the fall run board. And you can see there again, we're about 500 passengers per day lower than we were in 2019. Rebounding slowly.
I'm going to hand it over to Kelsey. Either way.
Either way.
If you want to do it here, whatever works best for you. I can hit this one. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kelsey Ryan. I'm the Service Planner Scheduler 2 for RTD's North Team and Service Development. So this is our system optimization plan, which was approved by the board in July of 2022. And it is a plan to optimize RTD's system. The thing about the Longmont aspects of this is these are all tied to the Colorado 119 BRT service. So we have not implemented most of these because they are to be implemented with the Colorado 119 BRT service. The only exceptions to that would be the LBR route, which is kind of it's essentially the LD route, and the LX2 route, which would resume service on the LX. We intend to bring back the LX2 when resources allow, but it is included in the system optimization plan, so it will happen. And I also have the special services update. So special services is our flex ride service here in Longmont, and it's presented, the data is presented in like the same way that the fixed route data is presented, starting with 2019 as a baseline. We have our in-service hours, our maximum number of vehicles, what that annualized hours looks like. So that has dropped some from 2019, but has also come up since 2020. And we are the closest that we've been to our in-service hours from 2019 as of 2023. And here we have our average weekday boardings for the Longmont Flex Ride. So it's a pretty similar trend to what we saw on fixed route, where it's gradually coming back up. It's not quite where it was before the pandemic, but as Greg said, it's slowly rebounding.
Okay, and it's my turn again. Right, for the future plan services, again, this is mainly related to the Longmont local network plan that was implemented in the process with the PEL, or the preliminary environmental linkage study that was done in 2015 regarding the 119 BRT. We presented this pretty much last year. It hasn't changed. It is still our intention to implement these routes when we get the opportunity, when resources allow, and when the ridership allows. And at this point, you can see the differences between what the current network is and what the proposed network is. I think the biggest change in that is that there will be service out east to where the Costco and the Walmart is, and the hospital. And, well, I'll go through the presentation. But when we decided on these routes, we again, we included them as part of the system optimization plan and as well as part of the 119 BRT overall plan. So when 119 BRT is to come online, and I think at this point we're looking probably May 2027, by the time everything is done, all construction's done, first and main station and everything is in place, then we would look to start implementing some of these routes, again, depending on what is then warranted at that time, what makes sense. So the evaluation overall for this local network, and this feeder service as we call it, included an external consultant evaluation. We had somebody come in and take a look. So we had a third-party neutral source. We coordinated heavily with the city of staff. We made sure that it was included in the BRT, like I said, report, so that when BRT comes online, it would be kind of the kickstart to allow for the implementation of this network. And we will look to phase it. And when we say phase, we would kind of evaluate which of these changes would make the most sense at the time of the opening of the BRT. It might be the routing out to east. I think that is the one that is pretty much on everybody's top list to be implemented, as there is a desire and need out in that area. But we would also look at some other potential adjustments, because we created this network plan in 2020 and things have obviously changed. So same as we do with the SOP, it's kind of a guide that tells us here's what we thought would make sense at the time that the SOP was decided on in 2022. But we've already noticed that certain patterns, travel patterns and things, and demographics and land use and development is changing. So as we move forward, there could be some additional changes to routing or service levels, service bands, stop locations. This is just, it's same thing as we would do with any other route implementation. Make sure that what we implement actually makes sense versus, oh no, this is the line that we had put on a map in a report. This is just, I know it's a lot of numbers and it's small, but it just gives you an idea as to what the service level change would be. Not going to go into detail, you can look at it, but you overall can see that the service hours would be increased with this local network plan. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chris for the fare study.
Oh, okay, thank you. Good evening. Just wanted to give you a quick overview on where we are with the fare study. We probably presented to you this time last year when we were in our draft phase. The board of directors did approve it last summer, our recommendations, and so I'll real quickly go through some of the highlights of those. When we were going through the study, the main goals were to achieve equity, affordability, simplicity, and I think we did a pretty good job with that. Next slide. This table shows you the new fare structure, and I won't go through all of the categories, but just a couple of things to take note of. One of the things that the new structure achieves is the elimination of the fare zone, so to speak. So we used to have the regional and the local fares. Now we just have what we're calling a standard fare. So 3-hour pass, $2.75. So that means basically somebody could get on an LD bus in Longmont, take that down to, say, Union Station, and then go as far as Lone Tree in the south end of the metro area for $2.75. Monthly pass reduced to $88. That also includes airport travel. So pretty significant savings over what those passes used to be. Next slide, please. And then just to kind of go over a little timeline of when things have happened. So the overall, the new structure went into effect the first of this last year. And as noted, this lowered fares for all customers, and we did simplify the pricing structure by eliminating the fare zones and boundaries. And we've also rewarded frequent customers with a very, very low-cost monthly pass, which again would be valid to any destination within the district. Another highlight of the program with the new structure is we have what is known as the LIVE program. That's a discount for low-income individuals. And it used to be if you were eligible for the LIVE discount, you still had to pay 60% of the fare. We've reduced that to If you are eligible, you'd pay 50% of the fare now. And the threshold for eligibility was increased fairly dramatically from 185% of the federal poverty level. That went up to 250% of the federal poverty level. That program was a little bit delayed in going into effect, partly because in order to determine eligibility, we use the Colorado Peak system. That's the statewide benefit system. And it took a while for the programming of that to get finalized. It actually came on board faster than we thought, so that went into effect roughly March 1st. Another component of the new structure, the EcoPass, the neighborhood EcoPass as well. We simplified that program as well. We had a lot of, we were going out to the public. We heard from employers a lot of concerns that the process was a little bit complicated. The pricing was very variable between years. So we've established a 2-year contract system, simplified the pricing matrix, and also lowered the contract minimum so that more smaller businesses could participate in the program. One of the most popular elements of the new program is the Zero Fare for Youth pilot program that started September 1st of last year. It is at this point a pilot project, so that will expire at the end of August of this year. However, we are hoping to find grant funding, possibly from the state, to keep that program alive. And as I noted, it's been very popular. Lastly, the new structure set aside $1 million for a transit assistance grant program, and that it was to provide fair media to nonprofit social service organizations, public agencies that may have clients with immediate needs. So with the expectation that if somebody is if we have a low-income individual, eventually they can get onto the Live discount system, but it takes a while for those applications to be processed. So for organizations that have clients with immediate needs, such as maybe a domestic abuse shelter, homeless shelters, they can apply for they can apply for tickets for to be awarded, which they can distribute to their clients. We opened the program in March. We had over 200 agencies and organizations applying. We awarded 186 agencies, and those were announced on April 4th, so clearly a lot of interest in that program. And I think, that's the end for the fare study. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ali Mansapahi. I'm the project manager for the Colorado 119 BRT project. Back in 2013-2014 timeframe, we had the Northwest Area Mobility Study that identified a bunch of corridors in the counties in this area to be identified for transit improvements, and the one that was including Colorado 287, Colorado 7, 119, and others. And the first one that got funded based on the planning and it was actually Colorado 119, and then an ensuing planning and environmental linkages study was spearheaded by RTD and its stakeholders that got finalized in 2019. The goals are outlined, as you see on the slide, basically to have a more robust transit system serving the communities of Longmont and Boulder and all the communities in between, with the focus on first and last mile connectivity, optimizing the transit services. So before pandemic, we had J and Bolt running this route. J stopped after a pandemic, and we still have Bolt, but the bus rapid transit with its nature is to be much more reliable and much faster than typical bus service, which is what we intend to do here. Oops. Oh, sorry about that. Did I skip one?
No, that's it.
So this is the current timeline that Natalie had already talked about. This is the latest timeline we have developed. As you see, by the time everything is said and done, we're talking about Q1 of 2027 that the full-blown BRT service will be in place. Our partners are listed. That's all right, you could see it, but
And we like
it's
to give ourselves a little bit of
little-
leeway, so when it says
so-
Q1, we're gonna give ourselves 1 quarter to make
Right.
sure that everything is done. All
right.
the punch lists.
So the diagonal piece of the project, the BRT project, as you see, or the trunk, is basically between Foothills Parkway to the south, all the way to Hoover Street to the north. And as you see, if you look at the legends, you'll see where we're gonna have what we are calling Q bypass lanes. We'll get it a little bit more into it later, where the BRT stations are, along with 2 park and rides at Niwot Road and 63rd. And then we will talk about, it's not on this slide, but we'll have another park and ride up in North Longmont. You'll see the improvements are listed in the slide, the transit stations, parking rides, bike lockers. And then one of the things that CDOT has undertaken is, where it says signal timing adjustments, it's part of an adaptive signal system that CDOT Region 4 has already implemented, and it's already working, but we're going to be really relying on that on the transit movement as well. Instead of having typical AM, PM, and off-peak plans, it plays with the cycle length and the splits all day long, and it's traffic based on live traffic. So it adjusts all your timings. So that is going to really help us out too. That's why I just wanted to mention that real quick. This is another way of looking at what we had in the previous slide. That parking ride I was talking about is way on top of the graphic, north of Highway 66 and east of 287. That's the parking ride that we're going to be building from scratch, and the city is helping us, has been helping us tremendously to get that going, because it's currently owned by a developer, but they're supposed to give us a 4-acre lot to build the parking ride, the future parking ride there. You'll also see where those Q bypass lanes are going to be, where the parking rides are, where on Colorado 52 we only have stops, basically stations, but no parking ride, and basically all the features that we talked about. We also need to mention that the PEL, when it was finalized, we were going to implement managed lanes similar to US 36, but a further full-blown traffic study deemed it infeasible, if you will, because we realized that people are not going to be paying to get in the managed lanes, only to get stopped at the traffic signals. Instead, we are going with the Q bypass lanes, which we're going to have a slide on.
We don't have.
We don't have the
video. I don't think this
show.
works.
Okay,
Yeah.
how do we have to find a way to share it with
Yeah, we'll share it.
with the
We'll share it
team?
with you, yeah.
It actually has a little animation in there too, as how the bus pulls into the its exclusive bus lane, proceeds to the intersection, does boarding, alighting, and then it gets a Q jump signal, proceeds through the intersection, and eventually gets back into the general purpose lane. We're very sorry about the technical difficulty. You see the little arrow is supposed to play it, but it's not doing it. But anyway,
We can act it
so
out if you like. If you want to act it out.
I will.
He's the boss.
He's the best.
Basically, the park and ride facility that we were talking about, the cross street is Park Ridge, which is north of Colorado 66 at 287. And then we're gonna have the BRT project gets past the safety and mobility project, which is the diagonal, but we're gonna make improvements in both Longmont and Boulder.
This one?
Is this
Just-
mine?
This is yours, just in general, BRT update. I think
Basically,
everybody knows this
yeah,
about
what
BRT.
BRT
We just have
is.
this in here in general for the presentation. And I can give a quick update. So just to make sure that everybody understands, yes, get closer. So make sure that everybody understands. So when we say we have a blue and orange pattern, we are representing the blue as what's currently the bolt, going to be minorly adjusted within Longmont and potentially a little bit in Boulder as well. And the orange pattern is taking the resources from what used to be the J and changing the pattern slightly within Longmont and then within Boulder as well. We're having conversations with the city of Boulder right now. There's a study going on specifically regarding the orange pattern within Boulder. There has been a desire to serve CU main campus and not just East Campus. CU is moving forward slowly to have a lot of their classes on East Campus and activity on East Campus, but it is not quite lining up with our timeline of putting this service into place. So we're kind of redirecting, like I said earlier, we make those adjustments as we come along. And we're redirecting and looking at some other potential routing options which would maximize the service efficiencies to CU within Boulder. So these are the dotted lines on the map as we're moving forward. Hopefully by, well, maybe by end of April, within May, we should know what the pattern will look like within Boulder. And then in general, I think it just gives you the same information. I mean, we have this presentation for the public as well. So we operate two routes. We have the orange and the blue line. You have the local service schedules within Boulder and Longmont, which will optimize to work with the BRT service. That is that feeder network, the adjustments of the local routes. And then we're also coordinating with the city of Boulder, like I said, to evaluate that orange pattern. We have been having monthly meetings with local communities and the partners along the corridor. We're also engaging with CDOT on their quarterly PMT, the project management team meetings, and we're doing an ongoing outreach to the public, incorporated with CDOT along the corridor to coordinate where we are with the project as we move forward. It makes much more sense for us to all do it together, as CDOT does the main portion and then we manage portions within Longmont and Boulder. And that's really all we have. So if you have questions, we're happy to answer as best as we can.
Yeah, I guess we can start down with Board Member Bennett if you want to start.
Hello? Oh, yes. So thank you so much. This has been very insightful, and this is exactly why I've joined the Transportation Advisory Board, is to increase public transportation right now for Longmont residents. And you answered a lot of my questions. One, I have two that are lingering. I am curious as to what has prevented the LX from being re-implemented, and if you foresee it being implemented before 2027. And then my second question is, when looking at the numbers of ridership between 2019 and 2023, just for an example, with Bolt having a ridership in 2019 of 1439 versus the present of 918, I was wondering how much do you consider the fact that Bolt also doesn't have any express routes, doesn't connect to Front Range Community College, doesn't connect to IBM anymore, and how much you factor that into the current ridership displacement?
Sure. For the LX, it is included in the system optimization plan, as Kelsey mentioned. So it is to be re-implemented. It's a matter of physical resources, operator shortage, and Eric and Lynn, you might have the numbers much more closely than I do, but I believe it's 150 full-time and about 75 part-timers that we're still short. That's significant. It's like 13 to 20% of our operators that we're missing in order to fully implement all that is in the system optimization plan. We also have to keep in mind the equity within the system. So if we were to implement DLX, it's a corridor that provides a service to a certain amount of customers, passengers within that area. And if we implement that service within North Team, then we also have to look to the other areas of the district, which we have a West Team, an East Team, and a Rail Team. And we'd have to see that we equitably can apply the same resources. So it makes it a bit tough when you're short operators, where if we were to implement the LX, I believe when we had it operating before the pandemic, we had at least 8 or 10 operators on that route. It sounds like a lot because it was only AM and PM, but because of the length of the trip, they're called trippers. And the way the service would work out is that you'd have literally one operator to run a trip down and back. And then you'd have to have another operator to keep the frequency to have that next trip, because the trip back wouldn't get back north in time to operate another trip south within the schedule. So you'd end up with quite a few operators. Looking to implement DLX, and will trigger a Title VI review within the district, and it would trigger more than just to say 1 or 2 or 3 operators that we would need if we were to operate 1 or 2 trippers in the morning and in the afternoon, because we would also have to look to our other teams, and they would then also require additional operators. So it's a little bit tricky to make it all work right now. But we're fully intending to bring the LX back. It was doing quite well before the pandemic. We were actually looking to add service to it at that time. You know, it's used by students a lot.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, it's one of, kind of have our list as to what routes we would like to see implemented sooner than later. And so when we get the chance for North Team to implement, that is one of our top 3 routes to look at. Now, for the numbers for the ridership, for the Bolt, the locations you mentioned actually did not draw a lot of ridership. It was minimal, and that's why we removed the route from those locations as we were evaluating the BRT, because it would have been a deviation, so to say, where you have more people on the bus that want to bypass than you would have people board at these locations. So IBM was out of the way. Front range is kind of out of the way. You have to get off the road. And so, yes, keeping that in mind, but those numbers would not make up for Bolt ridership much than what we see now. There were, thinking 2 or 3 Bolt 2 trips that we were operating that were also coming from Longmont down Foothills via Boulder Junction and then into downtown Boulder versus coming down 28th Street. So it was more the express route you mentioned. We did see some ridership on that route, but also those numbers were not that significant that we would say, oh, if we had that pattern at this time, then that ridership in general for the Bolt would show, 100 or 200 people more. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. You're
Also, I am one more that I'm curious about. I know that RTD has recently hired a lot of security officers, and I was wondering if there have been any in the north, or if that is a Denver-based operation.
I can comment briefly on that. Yeah, thank you for the question. So actually, a lot of what we've done is we've increased the police force and the number of sworn officers. So historically, RTD had a large presence of contracted security providers. And what we've moved to now, we actually hired a new chief of police, Chief Dr. Joel Fitzgerald, who joined us. He has restructured the force and increased the size of the force. It's actually, as we're struggling with workforce shortages for a number of reasons that we can happily touch on that are unfortunately holding a lot of our service back. In 2023, one of the only positions we fully staffed that was budgeted was actually the number of police officers, and we increased that number in 2024. That is system-wide, and that is happening. It is our chief of police is reorganizing into precincts that are more akin to the way other other police forces would work, so that folks can be, in their precinct, understand their areas very well, get to know all of the people on the system. And we are in the midst of rethinking that system and redesigning that to increase response rate. Interestingly, one of our big challenges on the workforce side of things is actually retention. We're doing great right now with recruitment of bus operators and train operators. Retention is really challenging because it is a difficult operating environment. We've had a number of assaults, including assaults that have happened during the probationary period. That is before an operator actually is working full-time with us and it gets out of their period after getting their CDL. If you have an assault early like that, it generally results in you don't retain the workforce. So the two actually go hand in hand, and this is why this is sort of an ongoing process. So happy to take if there's any follow-up, but it's a long-winded way of saying, yes, it's system-wide. There is some up here. Some of it is also needs-based, based on where we have the highest level of criminal activity.
Great. That's all I have for now, and I look forward to emailing for any further questions I'll have down the road. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, I guess it's my turn now. Thank you for the great presentation. It was informative. I wrote down some simple questions just to kind of tie in with Board Member Bennett about the security need. That this is a theory view, but why do you think we came to this? Besides obviously a high level of crime, but why kind of after COVID has this kind of spurred on?
It's a big question. It's a big societal question.
Yeah.
So certainly, we at RTD operate trains and buses. Our job is to get people to and fro. And there's been an increase of, activity of drug use. There's been an increase of criminal activity. We've seen this, we're certainly not the only agency that's experienced this, but we're really, as our general manager and CEO likes to say, and I like this phrase, we're really interwoven into the fabric of society. So, everywhere you go and there's a stop. And so our operators, our customers are consistently faced with, with these issues. So what we identified is we had a real need to have more trained officers, and that also includes mental health clinicians. So, just as society has seen an increase, certainly one that catches a lot of media attention is fentanyl use. And with the increase of fentanyl and the increase of fentanyl use, naturally, given that we're interwoven into the fabric of society, that makes its way onto the bus, that makes its way onto the train, that makes its way into our facilities. And, here we've announced this great thing with Zero Fare for Youth. So we're going out there telling folks, this is a great family activity. So you can save money going to and fro. And also, the youth of the region can gain their own access. Actually, Denver Public Schools testified at the SB 32 hearing, which is seeking funding to maintain Zero Fare for Youth, that they saw an improvement in truancy rates. Well, then simultaneously, if we're having drug use get onto the system, which we've just seen more of society-wide, it becomes a real problem for our customers, and we hear that feedback. And that's why we needed to move to having folks who are trained to handle those situations, trained to de-escalate those situations, and have mental health clinicians available as well. Not only is that so that the officers can actually respond directly, those officers, now that they're on our staff, are also creating and providing de-escalation training to our operators as well to help keep them safe, help keep any number of folks safe out there. So I can't really answer your question about the broader society increase. We've just seen the same increase everybody does, and if it happens anywhere in society, it hits transit.
Okay, well then, thank you. It's just always concerning when we just kind of respond with force with great societal issues.
And just to clarify, that is in our intent is to have the right mix. The key with it being police officers.
I heard mental health
is trained.
De-escalation tactics, all those.
And
Yeah.
Denver Stars program, if you're familiar with that,
Yeah.
that's actually the kind of, we've actually done a partnership there. And I will just put out the call to action that we are hoping that more communities create programs like that, because we are very anxious to partner with those types of organizations like we've done with Denver Stars in downtown Denver.
Yeah. Okay, and then just because you did mention the zero fare for youth pilot, do we have any data of how much that's increase of how much youth is using this service? Because I think, you know, a bus is an opportunity for independence.
It is.
Especially if there's access to it. And in our today's society where we're experiencing kind of, you know, they always say we're becoming the loneliest generation. Well, it's important to start with the youth, get them out. So where, you know, what's the data? So I heard, you know, it's great. St. Vrain's going to testify for it, but do we have any numbers?
Yeah, I don't have any numbers at this time. What I will say, and perhaps one of a member of our team may have numbers. If not, we can follow up with you with what we might have. What we are doing, though, is we made the decision to do a year-long full pilot. One of the challenges that often comes from running pilot programs in transit is you end up having very limited data over the course of a couple of months, and you don't know how much you're dealing with seasonality. You don't know how much you're still dealing with, you know, post-COVID recovery or shifts in patterns. That was one of our challenges when we examined zero fare for better air data. We've run this zero fare in the summer months and low ozone, but there's still ridership that's emerging back after COVID, and also we deal with some seasonality. So it's sometimes hard to parse out that data. We actually got a special clearance with the FTA to do a full year-long pilot. You can't always do a pilot on something like this, so that we could get a full year's worth. So I think the best data that we're going to have is going to be in September of this year, because we'll have that full year. But I'm not aware of any data we have right now, and if any member of our team might.
No, we don't have any specific numbers at this point. But we are watching the ridership on the routes, and we look at trip level ridership. So there is a little bit of an increase on certain routes with schools, but it is not anything where we would say, oh wow, there's something really happening here. We had done an evaluation before COVID, because this idea came up to have this free fare for youth. And in that evaluation, it was decided that we would not have any negative impact or would require any additional services for additional youth riders. Now, as we're looking, past COVID, and the service levels are down some, but ridership is also down in general. Again, we're not seeing anything that says, oh, you need to increase service, or you're having pass-ups or stand-ups or stand-by. It's just causing people to not have a seat on the bus for a longer period of times. But we have seen a slight uptick on some of the school trippers. When I say school trippers, for North Team, we have everything scheduled within the regular schedules in order to preserve resources, instead of having extra operators out operating specific trips for schools in the AM and PM. So on those trips that we have scheduled to match bell times as best as possible, there is a slight uptick, but it's not something that I'd say, oh, this is...
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great program just to encourage independence for our youth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to pivot a little bit, is the lack of operators related to budget, or is it just lack of people applying?
Well, we have people applying. We had 50 people apply just at this last job fair. It's a matter of how many stick around depending on what the situation is. And like Director Davidson mentioned, there's some that have had assaults within their 6-month period to the probation. And some decide, this is not for me. It is rough when you come on, it's union. So you're at the bottom of the list when you start out, and when everybody has to vote for what they're gonna operate. And those who come on last get to work last, so whatever is left over. And that could be work pieces that are what we call splits, for instance, that start very early in the morning and then have a break in the midday, and they end fairly late at night, to where operators can be out there almost 12, 13 hours. That's a work day. So if you have new people come in, it's rough for family life to have that type of situation. So that is a challenge, but that's a challenge in the industry in general.
Right.
So people will get their 6-month probation, they'll get their CDL, and then they'll go and look at UPS or Amazon or some of these other places. And
Yeah. Well, if I may ask, what's the kind of starting wage for an operator?
26 dollars.
Yeah.
It's 26 an hour, 25.99, I think. And there's a $4,000 signing bonus, and double time for overtime. So there was a big article in the paper yesterday. I think it was probably in the Longmont paper. I know it was in Boulder and Denver, that talked about, if you work, people can make a good wage. They just, as Natalie was saying, there are things. And another thing that affects is we have to follow of course, the federal drug laws, and marijuana being legalized. There are a lot of people who can't do these jobs.
Okay. Well, then, thank you. That is, according to MIT living wage calculator, that is just below a living wage for one adult for Boulder County. So just something to keep in mind, and then obviously include two adults and more children. That number needs to be even greater. But I was just curious. And then also, kind of since COVID, how many routes would you say, maybe this is Longmont, but have increased in frequency and have, and then therefore have we seen also an increase in ridership?
Yeah, I'd have to look, because I have to look at the other teams as well. It's not just for
Yeah.
North Team. We've had a couple of routes increase in frequency, but we can look and get you the list
Yeah.
if you'd like.
I'm just curious, because I always kind of see public transit as expanded access also means expanded use.
Right. Yeah, so we've had, I think, on the 19 and on the 8,
49.
and then 49 is coming up. Yeah, so not up in this area. I have to say, for Boulder, there hasn't been much of an increase,
Okay.
or for Longmont either. The ridership is.
And then don't worry, fellow board members. Last question. Park and rides. I know what they are. You park your car and then you go ride a bus. Is there ever thought of, the state is looking at more TOD districts, because that brings in more revenue. So is there thought of, instead of creating a massive parking lot, let's create housing, mixed-use development?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually have a department. We have a group of people within our systems planning department that is TOD oriented.
Okay.
So that they look at any and all the opportunities that we have when we have these big lots. Is there opportunity to work with a developer to make it more efficient?
Okay. And then I would just like to bring up if you know the organization Urban 3, that, it's dated 2016. They did a study between Austin and Charlotte. Austin has 3 times the infrastructure, but their value per acre is less than half of Charlotte. Partly because Charlotte has expanded service all the way till, I looked up today, they actually go to 2 a.m. now instead of 1 a.m. compared to 2016. So it's just, providing that access also builds that wealth and probably more revenue for RTD and
Right.
neighboring communities. So,
Yeah.
so it is something we need to somehow incentivize.
Pre-COVID,
greatly.
we did have longer service spans.
Yeah.
But it just hasn't, at this point, the ridership is just not there
Right.
to keep these trips.
Right.
And we know there are people out there that really depend on it, and it makes it really
Right.
tough. It's heartbreaking for us, too, that when we look at this, we know there are people out there that need to get to jobs and work these late night shifts and the cleaning jobs and so forth. And yet, for us to say, to run these operations until 2 o'clock at night, day in and day out, when you only have 1, 2, 3 people, is not efficient. We have to watch
Right.
where we use the taxpayers' money. So it's
Right. Well, the hard thing is then for a developer or building a TOD, why
Right.
would I build one if there's no service? So
it's
yeah.
if we allow TOD, then it is at our park and rides, right? So there would be service. It's just at this point, yes,
yeah,
lower
but,
levels
but I
of
mean,
service.
Lower levels. So
yes.
so kind of the story is, why would someone live up here in Longmont when they can't really reliably get to Denver? If they work in Denver,
Yeah.
so So that's part of the development process too. It's,
Yes.
you know, what I'm asking is what comes first, the chicken or the egg? So, no.
Yeah,
And-
that is the challenge.
You know, and I would second on board member Bennett's comments about the LX. You know, I used to ride it as well. Also, Longmont is becoming the largest city in Boulder County, and we don't have a reliable way to get to Denver, which is disappointing. So, I'm
Duly
excited to
noted.
see. Yeah, I'm excited to see the expansion. Again, I just hope the state and you guys are looking at how to actually build wealth within those TODs, and I believe is expanding service.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate that.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I'm in my first year of TAP, so this is the first time I'm hearing all this information. So I'm a transit user as much as I can, but so I have had experience over the 12 years I've been here in Colorado. I used to use the Flex to get up to CSU, and my husband used to get the LX down to Denver every day. Now he catches the Bolt, which is very infrequent. So I'll just kind of give you some background on where I'm coming from. So I'm just wondering, because you've commented a lot of times about the low ridership, and I'm wondering if you've done any studies or have any insight on why there's less ridership now. Is it because of the reduced service? Is it because there's now more remote workers than there are everyday commuters, which was kind of more the norm before the pandemic?
Right, it depends on the area within RTD. So we have certain areas where ridership is up, and there's quite a bit of usage. Aurora actually has multiple routes where ridership is pretty much back up to what it was, and where we need to look and see how we can add service again. In this area, there used to be a lot, considering for the region, a lot of commuter ridership, and a heavier load of commuter ridership, and that obviously is quite down since COVID, and that has had a huge impact on the routes, the local routes, as well as the regional routes. And that's what we're struggling with when we don't have the ridership, to see how can we bring these routes back, how can we implement the service, and not just have empty buses running around. Like I said, in Boulder, for instance, none of the local routes, the ridership is back up to a point, and you would think it's local, right? People are going to move around within Boulder on these local routes. Well, people are not riding within Boulder. They're having to come in from all over the place regionally. And they're coming from places where RTD transit in general cannot support that. We can't just, well, once outside the district is a challenge, obviously, but people have to live in Frederick and in Erie and in other places that are just so far out that in order to afford to live somewhere, and then working, for instance, in Boulder, even coming to Longmont, makes it really tough to provide transit networks that could sustain. So some solution might be more of a flex ride shuttle type service in certain areas, and we have those. But even if flex rides, the ridership is really low. We've had to eliminate some of the flex rides, and we had to kind of lower the standard as to say, okay, what is the number of riders that we would expect per hour? Used to be, 4 or 5. Now we're saying, well, if we get 2, that's great. But it's in general, again, has to do with commuters. But then the lay of the land. So the way this area has developed, it's sprawl. And sprawl cannot be served very well because it's low density, cannot be served very well with transit. And it's a huge challenge for the region as a whole.
Okay, so thank you for that. So kind of along those same lines, as you recognize that we now have less commuters, are you thinking about the way that as you kind of ramp up routes moving forward, not focusing on just providing commuter routes, but making your service more of an all-day service that people who are using your service, not at those traditionally commuter times, would be able to utilize? Because that's me. I don't use those. And I know many people who are also like me who maybe use it during the day when it's not traditional commuter times.
And so again, depending on the area within the region, it varies. For Longmont, it actually has been for a long time. I've been doing this North Team. I'm now on 14 years, but I've been doing this for 3 decades now. But for Longmont, it pretty much has always been that flex ride is really what would serve the community best, because people are trying to get from everywhere to everywhere. And we've had fixed route service, and we have changed fixed route service. I think roughly every 7 years we make adjustment and change the fixed route in order to try to address how can we get people best around. But that's not what the majority of people really need because of the way the city is laid out. So there is not a hub or a major destination like CU, for instance, or a major business like, I have to constantly mention Boulder, but some larger businesses that would draw a certain ridership. So for Longmont, looking at the service, I look at what the routes are doing, the local routes are doing, and I think they're doing actually really well considering the situation that we're in coming out of COVID and the recovery. Because I can look at other places within the district and say, you know what, it's just not happening there. So Longmont actually has bounced back quite a bit. And Flex right here is doing quite well also. So it's a matter of resources in this area rather than, okay, is it really the ridership, where we know there is a certain demand, there's certain needs, specific demographic-wise, that could be addressed if we could increase service.
Okay. So you just mentioned local service, so I'll ask a question about local service. Is there a reason why Longmont has a significantly less number of service for local services than compared to similar municipalities like Boulder, for example, has a lot more local routes than Longmont, and we actually have a very similar number of people who live here in Longmont, but we just have so many fewer routes and the timing of those routes as well.
Yeah, so the routes, where the routes are operating is in the most densest areas within Longmont. When you start looking on the outer side, then we're starting to talk sprawl, and the density does not support it. It's also demographics, where you have certain areas, people more car-centric. It's more of a suburban environment. And so, you know, if we had fixed route service out there, it probably would not sustain. That's why Flex Ride is there, so that people can use the Flex Ride to get from all places within Longmont to all places.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just one of my
it's frustrating for us, and we have to look at well, students. We do have students, but students have a different travel pattern, and it's even within the schools. We just don't seem to see the ridership with the local system. But yes, for CU, right? That's why I mentioned the LX. We're aware of that. We know that there are students who need to get to Boulder, to Denver, to get to university. So the LX is definitely at the top of the list. But I have to say, it's frustrating for us when we look at this, when we look at development, and there has been a lot of development, and it is all in a sprawl, low density situation. Rather, I come from Germany. Yeah. I don't want to get on my soapbox with that, but I look at this and I'm just want to, you know, come on, can we get this right? But it makes it extremely hard for us to provide service that is efficient and effective. Like I said, we have to watch our tax dollars when we implement them, so we don't want to have buses run around empty. But with the local feeder network, for instance, for the BRT, to look at, okay, have a route now go out to the Walmart area and Costco and the hospital, because we know development has occurred there, and the type of development that has occurred there and the businesses that are there are places that people do want to go to and from. So it's definitely something that makes sense and that we would want to implement. Again, do we have the resources? This is where the chicken before the egg thing, where you have, okay, do we have enough resources to operate it at half-hour service, which would make sense. If you have a trip length that is shorter than the headway, the frequency of the route, it becomes inconvenient for people to use a route. So if my trip is 20 minutes, but my headway is 30 minutes, I'm going to think about it. Am I going to drive or am I going to use the bus? If the headway is 60 minutes, I'm probably out and say no, right? And my trip is only 20 minutes, I'm going to drive. So it's those kind of things within the community. How far are people going? Where are they going? And what are the headways that we can afford and provide? If you provide too much, then you end up with running empty buses again. So it's a fine line, fine tuning.
Okay, thank you. So something that I know many people that I live around, they always ask about when are we going to be having access to get to the airport, because Longmont has no really good transit way of going to the airport currently. Like most of the cities south of us in Boulder County all have connection in some way to get to the airport, but to get from Longmont it takes 2.5 hours to get to the airport using transit, and that's just not any reasonable time that most people would do. So
again, it goes back to what is the overall demand. So Longmont in general, if there was a driving hub that would create that ridership, so in Boulder, it's CU. It creates a lot of the ridership on the AB. The AB itself actually has a lot of ridership that happens as of McCaslin and Flatiron and the stations, and not so much within Boulder, depending on time of year. So Longmont has the same challenge. There actually is not that much of a demand that would allow us to implement a fixed route all day. Yeah, I mean, if you do a route to the airport, you have to do 7 days a week, right? And so what is the demand? How much ridership can we get? And in all of the evaluations we've done, it doesn't add up to be enough to warrant that type of fixed route service. You couldn't operate it. It wouldn't make sense to have something that operates every 2 or 3 hours just to have a couple of trips, right? When you're flying and you get back, you want to be able to, that bus is going to be a half-hour service. You got to be able to get off the plane, get over there, and know that there is a bus. You don't want to sit at the airport another hour waiting for the bus. So it's the demand within Longmont itself that doesn't drive it. It's the same. I hate to say I have to Boulder again, but it is within Boulder. It's the same. There actually is not that much demand within Boulder per se. It comes from along the corridor where people then drive to these park and rides from 3, 5, 10, 15 miles away.
So since that AB route is so popular, what about if you connected Longmont to the AB route so that you could still use that same route that's being used all the time?
That's the Bolt. The Bolt interline. Well, we don't interline it per se, so it's not the Bolt actually continuing as an AB anymore, and we have separated it out because of the impact that's going to happen with the construction of 119. It's going to have impacts to the on-time performance operations for the route, and that would impact then the route AB if it was connected. So the route Bolt stands by itself and the AB stands by itself, but we make sure as best as possible that at downtown Boulder Station, we allow for what we call meets so that people can get from the Bolt easily to the AB. We actually have them scheduled, gates close together, so that it's an easy transfer.
Yeah, unfortunately that takes a long time from here. That's why it takes 2.5 hours, because you have to go all the way to Boulder and all the way back out again. Whereas if you could just go straight down to join it in McCaslin, it would be almost the same amount of time as driving. But there is no route that takes you to McCaslin right now from here.
No, and it wouldn't connect at McCaslin. If it would connect at Broomfield at best, or maybe at 270. I know Boulder County has asked multiple times to see if there is a way to improve the ramps in the layout of, not 270, I'm sorry, 470. Yeah, at 287 and right, to allow for reconstruction of that interchange to have that connection. We're not opposed to that, but currently it is just not feasible. It's not safe. Even when the LX is re-implemented, the way the stops are currently at 287, I don't know if you've been down there, but they're pretty much just poles in the dirt right by the...
I just want to do a quick time check because we've got 2 more items on our agenda. It's 7:20 at this point in time. So I just want to give you guys a quick time check. We've got one person waiting online too to come in for their item. So I appreciate the conversation, but we're going to probably have to get to just question and answer quick. So if we want to be out at 8 o'clock. Thanks.
I also appreciate the presentation. Is there data available yet to indicate whether RTD's reduced and simplified fare structure coincides with increased ridership?
Mr. Quinn?
Not yet.
No, not yet. Mm-mm.
And how do you quantify ridership in Longmont where we don't have fares citywide? Do the operators count passengers?
We count. Yeah, all the vehicles have what we call APCs, automatic passenger counts. So when somebody gets on, it counts them.
And are they now also
recognizes them.
distinguishing between adults and youth?
No, that is the operator making that distinction on the fare box, so to say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't really have any questions. I realize you're the experts, and you've been doing this a long time. And if we had more demand, I think a lot of this would be taken care of. We know that there's been a lot of long-term challenges and short-term with COVID and what have you. I was curious, the only question that I had, and not going to go too deep into it, you mentioned the trends with losing ridership. Do we see any trends about gaining ridership in an area such as Longmont, which you attributed to the suburban sprawl, which I totally understand? Do you see long-term trends that's going to help us build ridership, that's going to allow us to have these reintroductions of routes and those sorts of things?
So on the local routes, going back to what we had pre-COVID, which is a couple hundred riders a day off currently, I would think that we can see still an increase in ridership. Some of it has to do with the frequencies. And at this point, again, if we don't have the resources with the network, the feeder service implementation, we hope that we can make those adjustments that will help. They're routing adjustments, so hopefully we can hit some different areas within Longmont to allow service be provided to people that currently don't have service. So our hope is definitely that this local ridership will continue to grow back to what it was pre-COVID. For the regional services, it's going to be much tougher. Now with the BRT, hopefully, right, it'll be more frequent, more reliable than what we can do with the Bolt at this point. Yes. Same with the LX. We wouldn't put it back if we wouldn't expect the ridership to come back. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for the presentation and thank you for all the work that you all do. And I understand getting complaints all the time being on city council. And I just want to say, give you the thank you before I complain. So, that's how it goes. No, I'm not complaining. But I think it's because I'm understanding this transportation ever since I've been on council. I'm learning more and more, and I'll make this quick, Phil. I know he's like, hurry up. It is so fascinating that when we in the city who we're trying to increase electrification as far as vehicles and reduce the carbon footprint and everything. And I think about us also increasing our housing. And when we have a developer that, say for instance, by Costco, and I know that you all are looking at that's one of your priority areas, but when we start building homes in areas and there's no transportation, there's no line already created, a route there, then guess what? I'm gonna buy me a car because I can't get to work. Whether you all are talking, and it may not be electric either. I may purchase what I can afford because I need to get back and forth. Maybe I'm working in Boulder, maybe I'm working in Greeley. And so what I'm saying is, and I understand what TAB member Wicklund was saying, that the egg before the chicken. Sometimes I just feel like we're at a point now where we're kind of going backwards because we are growing. And I feel like we need to already have that established. Like we still don't have enough routes at high schools. So guess what? Parents are providing cars for their kids because They want to make sure their kids can do their after school activities and drive where they need to go, whereas Boulder pretty much have routes where they have high schools. And not here in Longmont, it's not like that. And so anyway, I told you I was going to complain. I said thank you first. But I don't have that understanding. I know that's another time maybe we can have coffee and you can explain some of that to me, but I just don't get it. I don't have a clear understanding about that as much when we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint and we're building homes, but yet it's taking forever, you know, for us to have transportation that should be readily available. Are you shutting me up now, Phil? Okay.
No, I was just going to say microtransit.
Right.
Because that's going to help us get from a lot of these areas to the existing transit network. But I'm going to appreciate your request for what I think is coming next. So thank you.
Oh, what's coming next? My next question?
We need more buses.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We need more buses. Absolutely. You're right. The other thing I had this, and then I'll be quiet. When we're talking about the youth, the increase of youth on buses and everything, have we thought about a program? And I know everything costs money. Show me the money. We need the resources. But have we thought about having a summer program for youth to decorate the buses? Have we thought about having a program where youth can do youth program on buses? You know, I don't know if you have a coordinator or a consultant that can do those things, but we need to start getting youth involved in order youth wanting to get on buses and understanding that that's a part of their daily activity and a part of their life. But it's not attractive. I'm not saying it has to be sexy, but it's not attractive for youth to get on buses. And I understand that. I know we didn't talk about it. You all didn't talk about having a type of outreach for homeless riders as well. I don't know if you have any a coordinator for them. I know you have a mental health people that can help with the officers and everything as far as RTD, but I don't know if you have anyone that's also helping our homeless population too that are riding the buses, which can also maybe be a deterrent for some of the kids if those riders may have mental health issues. So I'm just trying to think, and I know everything costs money, but I think thinking outside the box, you know, if you give kids like I know my kids love just a cardboard box to play with, but if you give them some paint and some ideas of creating some things, have we asked them why they don't ride the bus? I mean, what would they like to do? So I'm just, all those things as everyone was talking and I was listening to you all, I think we need to step back a little bit on some of the things. You all are the experts. I'm not the expert. I'm still learning, and we need to have coffee and talk about that. But I just wanted to throw that out there to make sure that we are going on the right, you know, going in the right direction, moving forward according to our comprehensive plan. And I understand Boulder gets everything.
No.
So that's the way it seems. That's all we've been talking about all night. I'm ready for Longmont. I know we got microtransit, so we got to do what we got to do, Phil. You got to get us the money, Phil. You got to get us the microtransit, Phil. You know? So I need RTD to step up in here and help us out a little bit. And I understand.
So just to one of your points at the beginning, just to make sure that we actually coordinate on a regular basis between staff and RTD staff. We meet at least quarterly, if not more often, to talk about development that's coming online and what the changes are that are happening, so that we with RTD can look and see what can we do, what changes can we make to address these increases or these changes in development. So this route out to the east with Walmart and Costco and so forth, we actually had looked at that pre-COVID and had hoped that we could have implemented it, and then COVID hit. So we have the communication, we have the conversations. We try to coordinate as best as possible when it comes to these kind of things, to talk over how can we influence the developers to help us out, right? To be the ones to put the bus stops in, for instance, the infrastructure that comes with it. That is expensive. So a route expansion such as that out to the east is going to require a whole set of new bus pads. And how are we going to do that? And it's not just the money, it's the layout of the physical landscape. Is it even possible to put these stops in place to where we can then connect them with ADA requirements safely to these developments, to the paths that are already in place? Because transit somehow seems to be the afterthought. Yeah. Yeah, we would be happy to obviously keeping the conversation and having those discussions, and whatever we can do to, say, yep, these are the things. I was going to talk to Phil about the expansion and see if there isn't an opportunity for some grant funding, so that when we come to the point 2 years out for that, when we want to make that happen, that we have funding in place, that we can have those stops built, and we can have the terminal, and make sure that it is doable. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. I just wanted to make one brief comment here, and actually it's kind of collective of a lot of the comments I've heard of, we want more transit, and that's desperately what I want. And thank you for the comment, not only about transit's often the afterthought. That's one of the things that we as a region, so there's so much great energy here, we have to flip the region's mindset to being very transit first, or the chicken and egg question, transit at the same time. When it comes to the money standpoint, I did also just want to level set, because there's the energy for advocacy here. I'd be kicking myself if I did not say it. Colorado is 44th in the nation for the state funding of transit. We fund RTD on a per capita basis at approximately $372 per capita when using the primary urbanized area, which is how that gets reported to the feds. If you look at other areas, say Seattle is one people often reference to me, of these kind of different divergent land use patterns. They have multiple transit agencies. So if you were to collectively add them together for the same urbanized area, it's north of $1,000 per capita. LA, similar. San Francisco, similar. Washington, D.C., similar. If you look at a similar per capita funding as us, you would look at Philadelphia, for example. Philadelphia has a similar footprint in terms of the size of transit area and funds at a similar per capita level. However, they have twice the density. So if you look at their funding on a per square footage basis, it's twice that RTD receives. And SEPTA is going off the financial cliff right now in Philadelphia, increasing fares, reducing service. And they're fortunate to be in a state that Pennsylvania's got $300 million that cleared the House to go to transit statewide to help. So I'd be kicking myself if I didn't say we want expanded transit. That's what RTD wants all day. We have a very large service area with one multimodal transit agency, divergent land use patterns where transit's the afterthought, and we're way down the list on state funding for transit. So any energy there is for advocating on that, those are some of the numbers to know. Thank you. I would be delighted to.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next up, are we ready? Next up, we've got Eric, and I can't.
Burley.
Burley, go ahead.
And Austin.
And Austin is also on the phone, and yeah, hopefully you can see him on the monitor. He can't see you guys, but he can see me. But that's about it. So unfortunately, I'll let them take off, and they've got some information about the intelligent rail crossing monitoring app that they've been working on. So thanks.
Just before I begin, can we get a mic check for Austin to see?
Oh, I need to turn him on, you're right. Okay, go ahead,
Can you hear
Austin.
me okay?
I'll turn you up.
Can you hear me okay? Check.
Yep.
Great. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to give an introduction on the work that Integrated Traffic Systems and the Strategic Integration Group of Longmont have been doing on the development of the Intelligent Rail Crossing Monitoring mobile application. So to begin, I'd just like to introduce Integrated Traffic Systems. So my name is Eric Verley. I've lived in Longmont for nearly a year. I'm a professional software developer and partner of ITS.
And I'm Austin Ader. Eric and I started ITS about 4 years ago. We thought there's a lot of opportunity to apply smart city and AI-based applications on the local government or municipality level. I think a lot of times these more high-tech projects are overlooked or there's not enough awareness. So that's kind of how we got started in this domain. And before we start, I guess thanks a lot to Phil for getting me connected. He's done a lot of work. So thank you, Phil.
Cool. Okay, so just to give an overview of what we've done so far. So our first intelligent railroad monitoring application was launched in the town of Plymouth, Michigan in 2021. It's been active since then. Plymouth, Michigan is a town of roughly 10,000 people, so a tenth of the size of Longmont. And we've amassed nearly 5,000 users in the last 3 years. We've had nothing but positive feedback from both the city and its residents. We've received quite a bit of press in the local news about the application and its uses within the city. So ITS introduced this idea to Becky Doyle's Strategic Integration Group in fall of 2023. And since then, we've developed and released a mobile app, which we have created a communication plan for and plan to release a pilot program for in the coming weeks. So what exactly is the app? How does it work and what are its capabilities? So we have installed a camera which has a view of the First and Main Street crossing, which gives us access to a live feed, allowing us to discern with computer vision whether or not a train is blocking the crossing or not. It also allows us to calculate the velocity of the train and show the train actually moving on the map throughout the city so that we can extrapolate the information that we receive at Main Street to the other crossings. So the first and probably most important capability is that we can send out real-time notifications of the status of block crossings. We can give a current and an estimated waiting time of the crossing based on the time of day, velocity of the train, and historical data. And as I mentioned earlier, the train tracker view, which allows us to extrapolate that information to make it as useful as possible. Let's give a short demo. Let's see if I can. So this is just my own screen recording, my own home screen here. And this is going to go through what the workflow is when somebody receives a notification. So let's wait a second here. So you're waiting. Oops. Let's go back. It's like when I press pause, it wants to go to the next slide instead. At the exact moment that the notification shows up, the play button goes away. Sorry, let me just skip ahead. Keep this moving.
Murphy's Law.
Live demos, yeah. Okay, well, recorded demos. Okay, so you can see the information that you receive in the notification. So it says the crossing that's blocked. We have Main Street blocked. The estimated waiting time for this train, and this is a real train. I could hear it from my window coming, so I was ready to record. Was 2 to 6 minutes, and we calculated from the velocity that it's traveling westbound. Once a user actually taps on this notification, it will immediately go to the live feed for that crossing, so a user can confirm with their own eyes that a train is there. although it's basically 100% accurate from what we've tested. But for anyone that needs reassurance, then if you go back to the home screen, you can see the status bar for Main Street. Oops. Is blocked. This gives the current wait. So at that current time, the train was there for 1 minute and 9 seconds. We estimate it there to be from 2 to 6 minutes. And you can see a little train moving on the map. Let's try to get this going again. Okay. That's the gist of it. That train will start to move when the video keeps going. So, oops. It's too much. Let's restart PowerPoint. Wait, okay.
You can try to come out if you need.
Okay, I can have it on my computer as well. Let me just
restart it.
Not restart it. Okay. Not responding. Great. Okay.
Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Go to presenter view here from the beginning. Okay. So that's the gist of the demo. Let's go to the next slide before it crashes. Okay, so then Austin's going to take over and tell you a little bit about the use cases for the city.
Sure. So thanks, Eric. Eric kind of went through the day-to-day kind of use case for citizens as well as EMS, is what we've seen in Plymouth. On a bit of a higher level, we also provide historical crossing records for each crossing that we support. So you can see in this little table the crossing and then the start time and the end time, where the crossing was blocked, as well as, you know, how long it was, what direction it was going, those sort of things. And we think this is helpful for a couple of reasons. One being, and this is a bit more recent, it's our understanding that in Colorado, the state legislator is, you know, considering legislation to hold railroad companies accountable for blocked crossings. I think if they're there for more than 10 minutes, then they'll be fined. And, you know, we can provide, you know, time-stamped photos of real blocked crossings. So we think that this could kind of keep the rail companies accountable and honest in representing your city in this way, and making sure that there aren't these, you know, crazy long block crossing times. And then additionally, if you have objective data over the years of a crossing, I think that could help you get larger, you know, capitally intensive projects such as, you know, overpasses and that sort of things. There's been a lot of talk about, at least in Michigan, about states trying to get funding for these railway overpasses. And if you have, you know, multiple years of data showing exactly how bad the crossing is, that might help you pursue those projects. And the graph on the bottom, just quickly, is a graph from Plymouth, Michigan over, I think, 2022 that shows the cumulative crossing times for the month. And you can see it's about between 40 and 50 hours a month. So almost 2 days, entire days out of the entire month, out of the month, the city is basically cut in half by a block crossing. So I thought this was sort of kind of indicative about how pesky and how much of a problem that these rail crossings can bring. But yeah, that's another aspect of what we're doing with Becky. Future capabilities. Really, this project will scale very nicely with more supported crossings and more cameras. You get some network effects with this sort of application that will allow us to get more proactive alerts of incoming trains. You can even get into intelligent routing to tell people to go certain ways if you know something's going to be blocked for a significant amount of time. I mean, imagine if you had in the perimeter of the city different cameras to sort of give a overall view of the train status in Longmont. And finally, we'd like to explore getting into some physical signage to show real-time crossing information. the mock-up on the right is just a kind of a quick picture of what we might envision it to look like, so people would be able to see at a glance what's the crossing status throughout the city as an additional medium in addition to the app. And this image right here, this is from the Federal Railroad website showing all the different crossings in Longmont. So as you can tell, there's quite a few. The decisions for implementing new cameras, the where we should place them, obviously depends on community feedback from the pilot program. Also, from an information standpoint, it probably doesn't make much sense to put two cameras a couple 100 feet away from each other, because it really doesn't show that much information in regards to the whole city. So that's also a consideration. And finally, feasibility of camera locations to make sure that a camera could be installed, somewhat easily. Okay, and then finally, I just want to touch on briefly for a couple minutes other smart city projects to, make sure you guys are aware. On the left side of the screen, you see a screen grab from showing that automatic license plate reading cameras are coming to Firestone. So I just put this in here to show you that these smart city / AI projects are real, and I think there's going to be more applications of AI or machine learning within local governments and municipalities. And then the screenshot on the right shows you some of Longmont's existing webcams. You might be aware Longmont has, I think, 14 webcams of traffic and intersections. So the point is, Longmont already has a lot of the hardware out there, and it's just a matter of running the analytics or the software over them to try to show some valuable projects. Finally, this is kind of a busy slide, but I'll just highlight two things here. In the upper right, you see a GIF of what I call parking management. I know I listened to a couple of the prior TAB meetings, and I know you had some concerns about parking enforcement and curb management with the microtransit system. In this application, you can kind of tell in real time, counting the number of parking spaces and trying to manage that better. And then finally, in the bottom right, we have some adverse event detection, basically being able to tell if there's an accident in real time and detecting sort of these anomaly events. I think this fits in well, in addition to Vision Zero, with limiting the number of crashes and fatalities. So yeah, that's just to kind of show your awareness on some of these new applications. So to conclude, and our future plans, first of all, we invite you to download the app and let us know your feedback. The QR code on the right will take you to the App Store to download it. Kind of a comment / question for TAB is, are there any additional data sources regarding railroad congestion studies that we could use to find locations for new cameras? And also, we'd like to return to TAB after the communication plan and pilot program has finished, probably about 2 months from now. And finally, we think you should consider what smart city projects are appropriate for the TMP or Vision Zero. So that's all we had for tonight. Our contact information is there, as well as our website if you're interested in learning more. So thank you.
Thanks, Austin and Eric. Any questions? They will be back, so.
Yeah.
I only got one question. Thanks for the presentation. It makes sense, because when I read the packet, I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
Are you only doing one intersection right now for the pilot program?
That's right. Yep. Just
Okay.
First and Main.
Okay.
So,
Then I'm happy with that too. So thank you.
Yep. Of course.
This looks like a great app to be coordinated with Longmont's soon-to-be-introduced microtransit app.
Good point.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Austin.
Okay, thanks everybody. Bye.
Great, just in time for Ben Ortiz.
And may I use that? Perfect. Thank you. Apologize about ducking out. Anyway, Chair Lehner, Councilmember Yarbrough, members of the Transportation Advisory Board, good evening. My name is Ben Ortiz. I'm a transportation planner. Tonight we'll be reviewing the proposed changes to Chapter 15.05.080, Parking, Stacking, and Loading of the city's land development code, as well as a new affordable housing definition. And so City Council was presented with the changes I'm going to present to you tonight in a zero reading back in March, and we'll be going back to them with an ordinance. But I would like to get a recommendation from the TAB on the proposed changes. So tonight we'll be presenting you with two options. Option one includes eliminating minimum parking requirements in several sections of the parking code, but retains reduced minimum parking requirements for affordable and market rate requirements, market rate multifamily housing. And then the second option includes eliminating minimum parking requirements for all use categories, including all residential use categories over and above what was presented to City Council in March. And so the project team concluded that the best way forward would be to eliminate minimum parking requirements entirely and establish parking maximums for all use categories citywide. So at the February 6, 2024 meeting of City Council, the Root Group presented several policy suggestions to further incentivize affordable housing, one of which included changes to parking requirements for affordable housing. So the Root Group recommended changing the parking code to require a minimum of 1/2 space per affordable multifamily dwelling unit and 1 space for market rate units. But in the multifamily developments that include a mixture of affordable and market rate units, the minimum parking requirement of 1/2 space per dwelling unit would apply to all units in the development, including the market rate ones. The project team came up with an alternative parking policy, which I'll review on the next page. Because there were other changes staff felt we needed to make throughout the code, we took the opportunity to make them at this time. And we'll review the more substantive changes with the Transportation Advisory Board. We won't trouble you with the minor changes. Many of them are just clarifying changes or mere grammatical corrections. So as noted earlier, the Root Group recommended a minimum parking requirement of 0.5 spaces per affordable unit in multifamily developments and 1 space per unit for market rate multifamily units. But that in multifamily developments that include a mixture of affordable and market rate units, the minimum parking requirement of 1/2 a parking space per unit would apply across the entire development. So this approach obviously would free up land for more units over the existing parking requirements, and that's a good thing. But the project team didn't think this approach would necessarily result in more affordable units being built. So to incentivize the construction of more affordable units, staff recommended that the minimum of 0.5 parking spaces be applied to affordable multifamily units only on a 1-for-1 basis, and then 1 space for market rate multifamily units on a 1-for-1 basis. And so we're hoping that tying the reduced parking requirement directly with the provision of affordable units would lead to more affordable units being built. For other affordable housing that's not multifamily, the present minimum parking requirement of 1 space per unit would remain intact. And then lastly, a new housing category, which is included in red here in the center of the three, is called affordable supportive housing. And for this type of housing serves people suffering from chronic homelessness. And so there would be no parking requirement, but developers would be able to provide parking if they feel it's needed. So other than the change to the minimum parking requirements for multifamily residential, the first substantive change is to group living uses. Now, these include group care homes and facilities, independent living facilities, and rehabilitation and treatment facilities. And so for this land use category, we're proposing changing the minimum parking spaces required to a maximum parking allowance. And this follows a citywide change made back in 2014 where minimum parking requirements for commercial development were replaced with parking maximums to great success. And the group living category is one that was left out of the changes back in 2014, which is why we're including them with this update now. And so we did consult with a local developer who is known for building these types of uses in this category here in Longmont. And they stated that they're supportive of the proposed changes, noting that the proposed ratios would give them the flexibility to right-size the amount of parking for their future developments. And I know this person, they would not provide no parking. They want to make sure their development works, and so they'd provide the parking that they need. The next substantive change includes amendments to parking regulations for educational facilities. And the first amendment on this page includes changing the minimum parking requirements to a maximum parking allowance consistent with commercial developments. For colleges and universities, we're proposing changing the minimum parking requirement of 1 space per 2 enrolled students to a maximum of 1 space per 1 enrolled student. The next change impacts K through 12 schools. So the first thing we did was we separated out the public and private schools. And then for public schools, the city doesn't have any site planning authority. So it would be up to the school district to determine the parking need for new K through 12 public schools. And then the next change is for private K through 12 schools. And for private elementary and middle schools, we changed the minimum parking requirement of 2 spaces per classroom to a parking maximum allowing up to 3 parking spaces per classroom, which should accommodate the teacher or perhaps a teacher's aide, visiting parent, and staff. And for private high schools, a maximum of 0.5 spaces per student or 1 space per 2 students at design capacity would be allowed. And this ratio is based on the assumption that no 9th graders are driving, very few 10th graders would be driving, and a fraction of 11th and 12th graders would be driving. And then the last change is for vocational or trade schools. It is proposed to change the minimum parking requirement of 1 per 2 enrolled students to a maximum of 1 per enrolled student. And then the last substantive change clarifies that the existing U.S. Department of Justice ADA standards are applicable in all new lots. This is to ensure that we're always applying the latest U.S. Department of Justice accessible parking requirements without having to amend the parking section of the Land Development Code. And so the language you see here is intended to replace the existing table on the next slide in the event the requirements change. So this table here shows the required number of ADA spaces as a function of the total amount of motor vehicle parking provided. We propose eliminating this table as noted in the previous slide, but we will create a handout with the most up-to-date ADA requirements consistent with DOJ standards that we will keep for our own reference as well as distribute to future developers. So the project team recommended adding a new housing definition called affordable supportive housing to the definition section of the Land Development Code, which supports the addition of this housing type in the parking table. So affordable supportive housing means residential units constructed that are strictly for individuals or families that are homeless or at risk of homelessness due to having an unstable permanent residence location or status, and where such units are paired with supportive services. And so you may recall that this housing type is included in the proposed changes to the housing section of the parking table, and that there is no minimum parking requirement for affordable supportive housing. And while the developer would not be required to provide parking for this type of housing under the proposed change, they could if they felt it was necessary. So subsequent to the presentation to City Council in March, the project team concluded, again, that the best way forward would be to eliminate minimum parking requirements for all land use categories citywide. And so what you see here would be the remaining land use category with no minimum parking requirement over and above the categories that we've already reviewed with you tonight. So the consequence of this approach would be that the parking incentive for the construction of affordable housing would go away because all housing would be exempt from the minimum parking requirements. For the co-housing category, we eliminated the word new, because it isn't a new category, and we created a parking allowance of 3 off-street parking spaces. For the single-family attached category, a maximum of 2 off-street parking spaces in the form of garages or carports would be allowed. We also added an exemption for driveways in the off-street parking requirement, but would require driveways to be at least 10 feet by 20 feet long if they're provided. For single-family detached, a maximum of 3 off-street parking spaces would be allowed, and the exemption for driveways in the parking count is included in this category, as well as the dimensional requirements. And for multifamily developments, a maximum of 2 off-street parking spaces per dwelling unit would be allowed. And then presently in the mixed-use corridor, multifamily developments are exempt from minimum parking requirements. And because we're proposing to eliminate minimum parking requirements citywide, this lined out section, second from the bottom, would no longer apply, and that points to a section not shown here. But lastly, as noted previously, there would be no parking incentive for affordable housing in the form of a reduced minimum parking requirement. So this last line would be struck as well. So why eliminate minimum parking requirements? Well, cities across the country are eliminating minimum parking requirements in their land development regulations, and there are quite a few reasons for this. Minimum parking requirements inflate the size of the city, increasing distances between trip origin and trip destination, and then this discourages walking and biking and encourages more automobile use. Minimum parking requirements lead to other negative consequences as well, including more storm runoff, which leads to more pollution in the city's waterways. Minimum parking requirements lead to more hardscape that makes the urban heat island effect worse, and minimum parking requirements increase the cost of development. It should be noted there is no such thing as free parking. The cost of parking is pretty extensive, and it gets passed on to customers in the form of higher prices for goods and services, as well as higher prices for rent and home purchases, which translates into a huge subsidy for automobile use. And so for people who either cannot afford an automobile or choose not to own one, a minimum parking requirement is tantamount to a subsidy paid by those that do not need to park a car on behalf of those that do. And then this includes people that cannot afford to own an automobile. So it's important to note that eliminating minimum parking requirements doesn't necessarily mean no parking will be provided. Developers want their developments to be successful and will provide parking for that reason. But eliminating minimum parking requirements empower developers to provide the amount of parking they feel they need, as opposed to the amount of parking the city wants them to have. And then lastly, very few lending institutions will provide construction loans for developments without parking. And as I noted earlier, where this policy is most beneficial is with smaller infill sites, where a minimum parking requirement would make it really difficult, if not impossible, to get a project built without major variance. So staff is seeking a recommendation from the TAB on the proposal to eliminate minimum parking requirements for all residential uses citywide, over and above the other land use categories already presented to City Council. Staff recommends approving the proposed changes that would eliminate the minimum parking requirement for all residential development to include parking maximum allowances sufficient enough to provide developers the flexibility they need to right-size the parking provided for their developments. And staff does intend to go back to City Council with an ordinance with parking amendments in May. Unfortunately, we were not able to make the deadline to present an ordinance at the April 23rd session of City Council consistent with TAB communication. So we'd like to take this up at the first regular session, which should be May 14th. So thank you. That concludes my presentation. And with that, I and most likely Phil would be happy to try and answer your questions.
Just real quick, I just wanted to briefly summarize. So we did take for zero reading to City Council the first piece that Ben presented, which was the changing the minimum standards. Since then, we've worked as a team within the city, and our city team together has decided that all of us can live with parking maximums, and that what was presented to council in the zero reading has changed since then. So we're going to come back to council with kind of the two different options, one with what we presented for zero reading, and then this new option, which is parking maximums only, no minimums anymore for the city, and see what they think about that. So we wanted to ask you first what your recommendation would be to City Council so we can present that at the same time we present to City Council. Thank you.
Well, I don't think it's any surprise to anyone here, but I am definitely for eliminating minimum parking. I think the sprawl that has presents so many problems for things like transit is going to be enhanced and become hopefully less of an issue if we have maximums rather than minimums. Of course, I'd love to see maximums way bigger than what's presented, but having maximum rather than minimum is already a step in the right direction in my opinion. I do have a couple of questions. So I was wondering, you talked about having the school district decide on parking moving forward. And I was just wondering if there was like any precedent for the school district doing this, if they had someone who would be working on that, or is this kind of a brand new thing for them to be doing?
Well, the I want to say council member Burrows, but that's obviously not. Board member Burrows. My apologies. The school district is actually a function or an extension of the state. And so the state has purview in this case, and the city just has no land use authority with regard to the public schools. And so the school district frequently does come to the city and seeks comment on their proposed developments, and they take it under advisement, but that's as far as it goes. So we could say, well, we think you should provide 100 more spaces than you're proposing, and they could say, well, thanks for your feedback, we're not going to do that. And if we were to say challenge their land use design, it would be something entirely external to the city processes. So most likely those challenges would fail. But yes, they are completely independent of the city.
We're basically a referral agency for them. So they take what we say under advisement, but they don't have to follow it.
Oh, okay. That's good to know, because I often see schools that have very empty parking areas, so they definitely could do with reducing some of the parking spaces for sure. Okay. And I had a question about why are driveways exempt from the single family housing? Why do you not include driveways as part of that parking maximum that you're proposing?
Yes, board member Burrows. So that was my idea. And I thought it would make it a little more palatable. But one of the things that increases the cost pretty substantial to residential development, most particularly to attached and detached single-family homes, is the price of that garage. And so I've looked up square footage per foot for the construction of a detached garage, and I think on the low end it's somewhere around $35 a foot. And obviously that's going to change depending upon the market, but we felt that driveways are multifunctional, So they're not necessarily always used for parking, although we expect that they would be, which is one of the reasons why we tacked on that dimensional requirement. So for example, if you have a front-facing home and then you have a space between the home and the sidewalk, we want to make sure that space is at least 20 feet. So to give enough space for your typical average car to park without encroaching over the sidewalk. And that was the intent of that 20-foot dimensional requirement. And then 10 feet wide is slightly larger than what we require of a typical parking space in, say, a parking lot. But it was a way to provide some off-street parking without actually counting it.
Okay. So would you consider making driveways not exempt? Because that, I mean, in reality, people do use their driveways for parking all the time. And so it functions as another parking space. So in addition to having the garage space, you also now have driveway as well. So
Yeah, correct. We could. I mean, if that's the recommendation you'd like to make, we can include that as well.
okay. I mean,
But you need to propose that, and then you need to get your second, and et cetera.
well, I'd be interested to hear what other board members think about that particular aspect. And I think that's it for my questions, actually. So thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Again, you know, I sat through it one time before as well. I'm also in favor of making parking maximums, and also just to inform other board members, there's HB 241304 that is being proposed. I hope that passes. It would make us go to parking maximums anyways within a year's time. So the state is looking at this too. But I think it's an opportunity for Longmont to lead the state, just as we've already done in a lot of ways. But just to bring up some concerns from a member of the public that did come to speak, you know, in terms of current developments, it has no effect. In terms of someone who wants to build a private home, they could obviously go through a variance and get a 3-car garage if they wanted to. Is that correct?
Actually, Board Member Wickland, the way the code is written as we're proposing it, it would tack on a maximum of 3 off-street parking spaces for any single-family detached home. So they'd be able to put in a 3-car garage, and that would be approved by right. They wouldn't need to seek any variances, but they could provide less than that or none if they wanted to.
Right. And I've been reading a book called Paved Paradise to prepare for this meeting. Fortunately, I'm only halfway through. But it's, you know, they talk about a garage, and it increases the home value by 20% sometimes. So I think what I appreciate you guys bringing is having a much more universal approach to parking maximums instead of just focusing on affordable housing, because everyone struggles at some point, and also not everyone owns a car, and they shouldn't be paying for that. So thank you. And if I so choose, I would move that we to expand parking maximums for all residential zones.
Second. All those in favor of eliminating the minimum parking requirements and going to a maximum, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No? Passes.
Thank you.
Okay, comments from board members, since we've gotten through action item 7, and we'll start with Board Member McInerney on my left here.
Yeah, my questions have to do with code amendments for parking. So you might want to, okay, he's with us. In our packet, page 20, the second paragraph states that if spillover parking does result from underparked development, appropriate parking management strategies can be initiated. What would those be?
Board Member McInerney, that would be something along the lines of a parking, basically a parking study. If we feel as staff that there's going to be impacts to a neighborhood based on the lack of parking provided by a development, then we would ask them to do an alternative parking study and provide that to us as staff, and we would review that and make determinations based on that, or have them mitigate that issue. Is that correct, Ben?
Yes. Also, too, you'll have a lot of reactionary people who say, "Oh, this is going to cause it has caused problems in my neighborhood because people are parking on my street who don't live there." And so one of the things we'd want to do is establish a metric as to what constitutes a problem. I have people parking in front of my home frequently, but I'm able to park in front of my home the majority of times. I would say one thing we need to do is define what constitutes a problem. So if I can't park in front of my own home, say 50% of the time or less, but I can park on my own street, does that constitute a problem? Probably not. However, if I can't park on my own street, say 80% of the time, then that might constitute a problem, but that's a decision we would probably need to make with the community. And so there are a lot of strategies that can be employed to address spillover parking. I was recently visited LA to watch my daughter play water polo, and we visited some friends, and they had a parking permit district, and so it allowed 2-hour parking on that street unless you actually had a hang tag. And then the owner that we were visiting, they gave us their little hang tag, and we put it on the rear view mirror, and we were able to park there all day long without getting a ticket. So that's one example of what you could do, but there are a lot of other examples as well. And it's really going to depend on the circumstance. If you're in a commercial district versus, say, a residential district, the approach you might take would be different.
Okay. Do all ADU proposals require site plan approval? They don't.
They don't. Not all of them, no.
There wouldn't be project by project consideration of parking for ADUs then, necessarily.
Well, the planners that review ADUs, they are looking at the parking presently, and they're just making sure that they've got one off-street space because that's what's required. However, presently, they can the owner of the ADU can request that on-street parking be used to meet that off-street parking requirement, and we look at that on a case-by-case basis. And a lot of times, streets are underparked, curbside parking is underparked, and we would feel that it wouldn't lead to a negative impact by allowing that on-street parking to be used for the ADU.
I see. I expect that you'll receive some pushback on the short-term rental maximum that's proposed. In fact, I think we had that type of comment before our meeting this evening. And finally, will the maximum of 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet for public transit terminals affect the First and Main Station development or any future rail station development downtown?
Well, what we do with those is a lot of shared parking. So we're going to incorporate a lot of different folks who are sharing that parking at different times of the day. So we'll take the parking max that's available for the transit center alone, but we'll also take our parking max that's available for the different units that are part of that too. And so we'll basically, It'll come down to the same idea as like an alternative parking study. We'll do what we need to do to make it work, especially with the park and ride piece of that, because it's not quite the same as any other transit station in the town. It's going to be very different.
Okay, so the square footage referred to is building square footage, but you're saying it's not specifically limited to a transit station.
Well,
It'd be more the entire TOD space?
Right. There's so many different uses going to be part of that space. There's going to be retail, there's going to be the residential, and then the park and ride. So it really doesn't stand alone at that point.
Okay.
It would be more indicative of what's going on up north that they were talking about with the Park Ridge Park and Ride.
Yeah.
That stands alone as a transit, park and ride facility.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I was hoping to get 2 comments for the board for the night. We'll start with you, Dave, or council member, board member McInerney. Got to get it right.
There we go. It was a really informative evening. I mean, I've been looking forward to learning about RTD and hearing their presentation for a long time, and the parking maximum proposed is an exciting move in the right direction, I think, for moving Longmont forward in transportation and the sprawl issues that we have, and hopefully having higher density housing so that transit and things like that are much more reasonable, and getting from one side of town doesn't take forever. I do want to make a note that I am organising a big event on Saturday that my fellow board members are welcome to attend. It's Longmont Earth Day. It's on Saturday. Look like the weather is not looking so great, so I think we'll probably end up going inside the school. It's at Timberline from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. and Transportation Department will be there, as are another 4 other departments from the city, so it's heavily attended by city departments. But it was a really informative evening, and I enjoyed hearing everything about.
Yeah, the great presentations tonight. I'm glad at least 2 board members of RTD showed up this time, because last year no one showed up. So it's great to have someone with a little bit more say and listening to our comments. As for, I did want to bring up 3rd Avenue, but because we don't have city engineers here, because I know that the project's not done. So I will make a judgment when it's done and we live with it for 6 months. So, but when is the next phase of that starting?
It's actually starting up very soon.
Okay.
They've got design plans to get going very quickly as the weather gets better. And if you do have a question, I don't mean to put Caroline on the spot, but Jim and Kyle both said if there's questions, please let them know, and we'll get answers to you as soon as possible.
Yeah, my perspective is, approaching Vision Zero, we got to figure out how to stop vehicles and slow down and where people are crossing. So I believe, those stop signs are quite important. So, and people will learn to live with it. Thanks.
Yes, wow, this was indeed a very informative evening, and I look forward to seeing things as they progress. I did want to acknowledge the Hal Morrison's comment from the public. I do think that the 3rd Avenue stop signs on Francis and Sherman in between each other are really close together, and it may be worth looking into further on how true it is that people are running those stop signs, and considering having a crosswalk at Sherman and 3rd. Also, last month I was not able to attend as I was at South by Southwest, and one exciting update that I had was I got to see CEO Dara Khosrowshahi. I still mispronounced the CEO of Uber's names wrong, but he identified that one of the key things that Uber is looking to do is to have microtransit. And so it is exciting to see that Longmont is ahead of the curve, but also to be aware that that a major rideshare app is looking to take that market. So we need to be really on top of our game and make sure that we are providing the most equitable services for our residents in Longmont. Other than that, yeah, thank you.
Great. I just want to acknowledge Phil again for the $1 million for the microtransit. Well done. I know that took a lot of work. Seriously. And I think the comprehensive review by RTD was good. I think the audience that they provided us with was great to see all those folks here. I thought their fare structure is very well done. You know, I think some of the challenges that they face with ridership and all that, I know that we're seeing that across society in regards to, you know, increasing ridership so we can increase our routes. It seems like that's just going to be a challenge as we go forward. And excited to see the BRT. And the parking maximums, I think, is a great idea. And kudos to you, Ben, for doing all the homework on that. You guys keep us very well informed, and I appreciate that. So thank you. And Councilmember Yarbrough?
Thank you. Of course, thank you for all you do. I appreciate you all. I will say I have to agree. I was going to bring up the exact issue that the public invited. I can't remember his name. I was at, this happened to me yesterday. I was so confused, like why cars was missing the stop sign. I mean, just driving through the stop sign on 3rd. And I was like, wait, what? You know, so that is happening. I don't know if we can get someone maybe to sit over there. I mean, resources, right? But, or a camera.
We just bought a new camera.
Okay,
We're so
awesome.
excited to try that out. So that's maybe a place where we could try it.
Blinking. I was thinking about that too. But yeah, he's absolutely correct because I was going to bring it up tonight because it happened to me yesterday. And I was like, wait a minute, what just happened here? Why did that car not stop? But the car behind him stopped. But I mean, it was just like they're not used to the stop sign being there or something. So if we can make those stop signs that has the red, you know, lights on it or something like that, so people can know and aware that they're there. But that's right. That was, I think, it. I think that's all I had to say. Anyway, I hope I wasn't too harsh with RTD today. But you all are amazing with all your questions. And suggestions. But yeah, thanks for the money and thanks for staying late today.
Okay, items for the upcoming agenda. Phil, do we want to cover that? It looks like it's the CIP update. I suppose Jim would be doing that for 2024?
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
he's getting ready to do that as we speak. So
Perfect.
not right now, maybe, but
If there's nothing else, I guess I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
Seconded.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Great, thank you.